Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to In the Eyes of Truth, uh, the English edition. And today with us is Joseph Rose. He is an American immigrant in Russia, here in Moscow. Heads the Expat American channel. So he's doing a lot of blogging in the area on life in Russia. Uh, Welcome. Could call you Joe.
Top of the morning, mates. And on this ends my poor British accent, but does not end my message to you. Are you less than thrilled to learn that asylum seekers in the UK have quadrupled in a year? Are you tired of certain favored demographics benefiting from a two-tier policing system? Are you tired of foreigners being in the top tier of the two-tier legal social system you live under? Are you tired of the government stripping you of the right to go into entire neighborhoods and sectors of your cities without fear of crime and harassment? Are you tired of the fact that your womenfolk are afraid to go out in the evening? Are you tired of your children being bullied in school and you being able to do next to nothing about it? Are you tired of the grooming gangs? Are you tired of being taxed to death? Are you tired of net zero and Agenda 2030 destroying your farming and village life? Are you shocked and scared of what's happening across the channel to the farmers in the Netherlands, knowing the same thing is coming for you? Are you tired of having your Christian faith and English culture under attack by the government, the left, and their foreign pets? Are you angered knowing that you live worse than your parents and your children will face even more pressure and poverty? Have I got a deal for you? How would you like to trade in your overregulated Crown-owned 300 hectares farms for a 3,000 hectare farm that you will own and pass on into perpetuity to your children and grandchildren? How would you like grants, low-interest loans, free assistance to get you started farming this new land? How would you like low taxes, minimal government interference as you farm to your heart's content in some of the richest black earth on the planet? How would you like to live in a Christian land where Christmas and Easter are still the main holidays, where government leaders do not hide their faith and go to church? How would you like to live in a land where large families are celebrated, given assistance by the government? How would you like to live in a land where Christian values are celebrated and upheld, and the people friendly and helpful? Where schools teach children the fundamentals of mathematics and science, where more engineers are graduated every year than any other nation on earth, where a home or church schooling is also an option, where factories are opening up each and every month, and jobs are abundant for those with technical skills. How would you like to live in Europe's #1 economy, growing faster than any Western nation? Well, to your shock, or maybe not, this nation is called Russia, the fourth largest economy in the world, an agricultural superpower that still has tens of millions of hectares of land in need of farming. And just to make things sweeter, President Vladimir Putin has recently signed a decree that will give traditional Christian families from the UK and the rest of the illiberal Western countries refugee status in Russia. You no longer have to know the Russian language or be related to Russians to be able to get a temporary residency visa that can be turned into a permanent residency visa that can then be turned into citizenship. By God, it's as if Providence itself has given you the keys to the land of milk and honey. Are you ready to seize the opportunity? Is your faith strong enough to take the hand that Providence has extended and save your children from Sodom and Gomorrah? True, the task may be daunting, but it's not. And we at Exit Strategy are ready to help. We're here to answer the questions, create the action plan, guide you onto those gentle shores. We have the resources, we have the people, we have the strength to bring you from the seas of storm, sin, and oppression to these quiet, peaceful shores. Reach out and contact us. The details are in the video's description. Russia's not Zion, but it's the closest thing there is on this mortal coil, and we're here to guide you to it. Exit Strategy World, your partner. Exit Strategy World.
Thanks for having me, sir. It's nice to be on your show.
Can we go with Joe or strictly Joseph?
Yeah, Joe's fine.
Fine. Well, people get, some people get tense. Some people go, hey, call me Jay.
I'm not
Whichever.
British. Well, I'm 50% British, so, but you don't have to call me Joseph. Joe is fine.
And I
And
was
you
wondering,
are Stan or Stanislav?
I never Stan. I hate that name. You can call me Stas.
Okay, Stas.
Better than Stanislav
A real.
Mikhailovich. But yeah, and I'm a quarter German, but hey, nobody's perfect.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm 10% German,
Yeah,
genetically.
my grandfather was German, from the Second Reich, the German
Oh,
Empire.
really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He
Wow.
wound up being he was a German aristocrat, wound up being in Western Poland after Poland reappeared after
Uh-huh.
World War One, and then became a Polish officer after he lost everything on cards. Uh, yeah,
Wow.
that
Wow.
works out.
Well,
And
I
then
mean, I
got captured
guess
by the Soviets, and then eventually joined the Soviet Red Army and became a Soviet citizen. So,
interesting. Well, I can tell your viewers something I haven't said myself on my show, I don't think.
Mhm.
My family line, part of it is from Russia, and it was Jews living in Russia that left in 1898
Mhm.
and took a boat through Ellis Island to America. So my last name used to be Rosenfeld and
Ah,
is now just Rose. So I'm 20% Ashkenazi Jew. And yeah, but born and raised in America. Never thought I would live here in Russia.
yeah, my father is officially, God rest his soul. My father is officially Jewish, but it's funny because his family's all blue-eyed, and half of them are blonde and look very, very. Most of them look, or a large part of them look very Slavic. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because the way the Jews do it, mother, grandmother, but it doesn't matter if that mother, as long as on the women's line, you could have, say, Russian husbands all the way down, and the child is like 1/20th Jewish, but it gets considered full-blooded Jewish. But reality is,
Yes, yes.
there's very little blood left. It's all mixed. It's funny way to do nationality. But interesting enough,
Yes, yes.
I was reading a interview with a Greek Orthodox monk who was from an Orthodox Jewish family in Israel, and said when he was studying Talmud, he got pulled over and by the Holy Spirit, started studying the Bible, and became an Orthodox monk. And he said to his family,
Wow.
they literally had a funeral service for him. He no longer
Wow.
exists, because if you change religion, you're dead. Just they bury you. Literally, they buried an
Mm.
empty coffin of their son and put a gravestone up. He's dead. So that's it. And they
Wow.
no longer have any contact with him. Well, from their side, they refuse to.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Big
Insane.
commitment there for sure.
Yeah, insane, insane. It's a bigger commitment than moving to Russia from the US.
Yeah, but you're right. There is a lot of mixing going on because I'm also 10% German, and the Jewish part of my family that came over, they had German names. So we're guessing maybe they were part of the Volga German immigration into Russia, something like that. So
Yeah, there's a lot of mixing and moving around. So where did they move to originally when they came? You're from up north, as far as I remember, right?
no, I was born and raised in Florida,
Oh,
but
Florida. Okay,
they
so I'm way off.
they moved to yeah, that's okay. They moved to New York, and we did some research. And my grandfather, who was 100% Jewish, he was doing real estate. I'm sorry, his father was doing real estate, and then he was doing my grandfather, my Jewish grandfather. He was a piano player, like in the Roaring Twenties, like in
Hmm.
New York, like Great Gatsby style. And his what would become his Catholic wife, she was a big band singer, and apparently they were also or he was gangsters, like Gotham City type stuff. And
They had a body count, a literal body count.
like a lower level guy, like someone who would be breaking legs, things like that. And the story goes, this is why they fled to Florida in their later years to escape murder charges and things like that.
Oh,
So
very serious body count. So, yeah.
interesting, huh?
And from those gangster roots.
Here I am.
So what did your father do? Because if your grandfather was a gangster and a music and a pianist, what did your father do?
My father is still a speech therapist in
Ah,
Florida.
it's a big difference.
So he's a popular regional speech therapist in Tallahassee, Florida.
Oh,
And my mother is, generationally from Britain, but her family came over to Florida around the time of Andrew Jackson, so they've been in
oh,
Florida forever.
yeah.
Um, and
Right after they
you know,
captured, grabbed Florida from the Spanish.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Thanks for the
uh,
Revolutionary War help. We'll be taking this now from you. Bye bye.
exactly,
And in
exactly.
in another 100 years, we'll attack the rest of your empire
Yeah,
down in Cuba
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Philippines.
So,
This is just a down payment.
they knew air conditioning was about to be invented. So, hey, we'll take Florida.
Yeah, we can live with this now. Speaking of which, hurricanes pass by, or were they affected?
Well, I mean, I think a little bit because you lived in America for a while, quite
Geez,
a
I've gone
while.
through like 10
The
plus hurricanes.
hurricanes, they sound much worse on the news for anyone who's not living there. And of course, they are bad in terms of property damage and in terms of death. Unfortunately, I think it's the lower income people that are hit the hardest because they don't have the funds to leave or the know-how to leave. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the lottery in a bad way. You're living in
Oh,
Florida and you're seeing it coming and you're wondering, is it going to hit our town or city or is it going to turn? And it could turn at the last minute. So you got to decide, do I spend vacation money to, go to, I don't know, some other state, and if so, which state? Because as you see, the hurricane can make some progress throughout
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole of the United
yeah.
States. Or do I just stay home and just cross my fingers or say a prayer that it's going to turn and not hit us? And like I'm from Tallahassee, so we're 40 minutes by car off the coast. So we're usually fine. But there have been times when I've left town and I'm glad that I did.
Yeah, you really can't ever tell with a hurricane. They are a bastard thing. What they call hurricanes here in Russia is really just a thunder front. It's
Mhm.
coming through, and they call, oh, it's a hurricane. It's not a hurricane. Oh, there was a tornado. It's a hurricane. No, no, no. Or, oh, hurricanes form a tornado. No, they form ends of tornadoes.
Right.
It's yeah, they really don't have an understanding of what a hurricane is.
Well, the benefit of a hurricane versus an earthquake, or let's say war, is about a week ahead of time it's coming and you can see it coming. So,
Now, one of the worst hurricanes that ever hit Texas, because the last 4 years I lived in the U.S. was in Texas, was in Galveston, Texas, which was the main port of Texas and the former capital of Texas. And it
mhm.
hit about 120 years ago. So ship came into port, screeching halt. There's a hurricane right behind us. No time to really evacuate. People started panicking. The hurricane hit, mass flooding. People went to the high ground, and I think something like 2,000 people died. And they were picking up dead people off the trees
Whoa.
because when flooding hits, it's not just people that climb trees.
Wow.
Yeah, all the poison snakes climb trees too. Really, really well.
Really?
So there were
Oh my.
corpses all over the trees. Just there were get people in the middle of the night getting bit by rattlers, by water moccasins. The whole host of U.S. got a massive amount of poisonous snakes. So they're all up there with them. And yeah,
Yeah,
so
well, I
that
mean, the South has a lot of creatures in it, snakes and alligators and sharks. And I mean,
crocodiles too, by the way.
I remember hearing reports of sharks eating people when that hurricane hit New Orleans a few years back.
Yeah, bull
Uh,
sharks. Bull sharks are perfectly fine in fresh water, and they've been seen as far as up to 300-400 miles up the Mississippi. Yeah,
Amazing.
so they were
So
fly
you were in Texas for 4 years. Where else did you live in the U.S.?
North Carolina most of the time. Well, I've lived in a lot of places because of military and such. We first moved to the U.S. It was to Pittsburgh, and then about half a year later moved to East Palestine, Ohio. Yeah, the one with the big train explosion a year ago. And then from there moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina, and then stayed there. Went to university in Raleigh, North Carolina. Also lived in West Virginia for a year and a half.
Wow. Wow. So you
Yeah.
have an affinity for the Confederate States, it sounds like.
Well, the South shall rise again. There ain't no doubt about that. They'll put it, yeah, they can take their Fort Liberty and shove it up their collective arses. Fort Bragg after General Bragg, God damn it.
No, but I am curious. So how serious or funny do you take this?
What part?
The
Uh,
Confederate States.
I think the South should have its own country. It's an
Okay.
occupied, and I served with those guys I served with a lot of those guys in the military. They were from not the bigger cities that are Yankinized, but the small towns and the villages. The people they know where their grandfathers served or their great
Right,
grandfather.
right,
Under which
right.
general where they fought. They consider themselves an occupied country.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's a very interesting subject for me because I was raised by university types, like intellectuals. I mean, I grew up in the South, but I was not like a country boy. I was just surrounded by country boys, and my father, of course, had his roots from New York, and so I never really felt like a Southerner, although I was raised there. And I remember going to Atlanta, Georgia, for their laser show, for their fireworks
Mhm.
show, and it was a big, there's a big etching on the mountain of Confederate soldiers,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and they're doing a laser show of all the Confederate states, and you see the Confederate flag flying everywhere. And what struck me, because I was raised, I guess with this whole U.S. attitude is in this idea of the Confederate, that was bad, and that was racism, that was slavery. But what I saw was this crowd that was like half black, half white, all over the place, like Fourth of July barbecue type celebration. Everyone's together, everyone's having a good time. The Confederate flag is everywhere, the laser shows everywhere. And I was on a date with this New York girl, and we were looking around at each other, and we were both kind of like, what's going on here? And it was very eye-opening for me to see that flag does not mean for everyone what I've been told it means. And that the Confederate States are not in general just a terrible thing you would just throw away completely. So that's why it's interesting. It was interesting for me to see that, and it's interesting to hear your perspective on it.
Well, and by the way, some of those memorials, you will see etchings of black soldiers, Confederate
Mhm.
black soldiers. What they don't teach, they don't teach, they rewrote the history. I'm not saying slavery didn't exist. It very well did exist. But slavery was a lot more nuanced than the black and white crap that no pun intended, that gets portrayed by Hollywood and the rest.
Mhm.
Charleston, North Carolina, I'm sorry, Charleston, South Carolina, which was the biggest port city in the South, 20% of the population were free blacks. Quite a few of them the biggest slave owner in the South, I'm sorry, in the South, and at the start of the Civil War, the biggest slave owner in South Carolina was a black man. He had 400
Mhm.
slaves. Um, the biggest uh, the biggest slave owner in the early 1900s in Louisiana was an African woman. She was brought over as a slave. She and her family were sold off separately. Slaves, in most cases, were allowed to earn additional money. She earned enough money to free herself, buy her family. She was a very intelligent woman. and became the biggest banker in the area in Louisiana, financing all the other plantations, and wound up with a giant plantation. And then her kids spent everything. And then the end of
Wow.
that story, the usual rags to riches and back to rags. Um,
Wow.
or the fact that there were white slaves. The difference between the black slaves and the white slaves, well, the white slaves are primarily Irish. They were
I was
debt
gonna say,
slaves,
yeah.
and the slave part didn't go on to their children, but there
Mm.
were white slaves. So there it was. Well, the North had slavery. It just had debt slavery to the factory.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah, indentured servitude, right?
exactly. You came in there, immigrants came into the North, they got a job at the factory, they were given a uniform, they were given a one-room hovel, and they were paid in factory credit, and they could only spend it at the factory store. So every month they just went deeper and deeper into debt. You could leave anytime you want once you sold off your or paid off your debt. So I mean, that
Wow.
is slavery. That's just by a different name.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
So,
Wow.
and your chance of getting out of that slavery are zero. Well, or look at the Chinese slavery. I mean, a very large portion of the workforce that built the transcontinental railroad in the U.S. were Chinese slaves. They came in as guest workers. Their documents were taken away. They were forced to work, and if they ran away, they had headhunters go after them, bring them back dead. They didn't need them back alive. They needed examples.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, I mean, you start digging in, yeah, that was a lot of it. And the South, I mean, in the South, there were during the Confederacy, there were a lot of uh, freed blacks that fought in the Confederate Army. In fact, in First Manassas, there was one Confederate battery which was blacks. They were free
Mhm.
blacks. They fought for their homeland. And at
Mhm.
the end of the war, the South was freeing slaves and raising an army of 300,000 blacks, freed slaves.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
automatically they became free. Their families became free. So if you figure 300, if they got into 300,000 plus family, that's about 200,000. Effectively, you just ended slavery right there.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and General Lee said, the biggest mistake we did was we declared independence first instead of freeing the slaves first. Lee never owned any slaves, as a matter of fact. Washington did. Jackson
Very
did.
interesting.
So it
Wow.
was and a matter of fact, even Forrest, General Forrest, he owned slaves. He never mistreated them and it was probably most slaves weren't mistreated. If you mistreat people, they don't work well. You treat them well enough, they work well.
Mhm.
It's just human nature.
Yes,
Uh,
I know this. Yeah,
and
for
there were quite
sure.
a few widowers who were slave owners who married black women. Who
Wow.
it was I'm not saying it was always like that. They were bad, there was good, but it's very nuanced. You don't see that from Hollywood. You see a very black and white outlook on history. So you
Right.
don't see black slave owners, even though they were and they were recorded. So and when you go down to Louisiana, New Orleans, everybody's mixed race. Christ,
Right.
they're
For
so
sure. For sure.
you know.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the US were to, have harder times and let's say break apart, hypothetically speaking. I wonder if that might be good for the world in total in terms of having a more multipolar world where the US structurally became something like, I don't know, Western Europe today, where you'd have different independent territories, competing in the international marketplace, let's say. Um, yeah, just something to think about.
I think anything that gets the that satanic elite in Washington to leave power, or at least curtails their power, is going to be better for the rest of the world.
Right.
I mean,
It is starting to look like that for sure.
did you
It's
see the
crazy.
in 22? Did you see the Congressional Research Center's research on amount of times the U.S. has used military force around the world incidents?
No, no, I didn't see that study.
Oh, you do remember that under the U.S. Constitution, unless the U.S. soldiers are fighting in self-defense, the only way you can use military force in another country outside the U.S. is with a declaration of war.
Mhm, yes,
How many
exactly.
times has the U.S. declared war?
But we don't do that anymore.
Or we never, actually, we never really
Exactly.
did. U.S. declared
Exactly.
war 11 times
Right.
since
Right.
19 since
Wow.
1798. they counted up 468 instances of use of military force. I'm sorry.
So the argument that I heard on the other side of it, I think I was listening to the military analyst, that he was saying that if you're trying to look on the bright side, I'm not anymore, by the way. I'm convinced DC is run
Yeah,
by people that are agnostic at best.
at best.
But if trying to understand them. The idea is World War II ended and it ended well, but it could have been really, really bad. We could have lost the whole world. And because of this, we're now going to be sure the US is forever and always the number one power in the world. And we won't let it go because it's better that we be in charge, even if we have to be a little bit bad, than to ever risk, something else like this happening again.
Tens of millions of dead women and children would probably say otherwise. As a matter of fact, that
Right.
congressional report, which was really eye-opening, the number of uses of military force by the U.S. since 1992, including 1992 to 2022, was 251 instances.
Mhm. Wow.
Yeah, more than half was in the past 30 years. So,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
this is, plus that doesn't count CIA, doesn't count special operations. That's strictly U.S. Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force. Bomb here, bomb there.
mhm, mhm.
So,
So, what do you think of Trump? You think he might be a good disruptor to help things move in the right direction?
I don't know. What's your opinion on Trump?
So, uh, because I hear like Russians, they might say that let's let Kamala win, let's let things get even worse. I think that because because the U.S. is the world power right now, I think it'd be better for the world if they had a soft landing. I think under Kamala, it'll just be awful. I think under Trump, he might, be able to have a rough landing, but not blow up the plane, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, that
And I
makes
think
sense.
that I'd rather see the U.S., just be a world power and not the only world power and not completely collapse because that's a big country with a lot of power. And if it completely collapses, that's probably going to be difficult for the whole world for quite a while. Not to mention, you do have children living in the US where it's
Oh
not
yeah.
their fault. I don't want to see, I don't want it to be like Mad Max over there, so if that makes sense. So
I,
that's my theory is that
right,
it'd be better
right.
if Trump becomes president.
Well, yeah. You're right about that. But well, first of all, the U.S. is no longer the only world power, the superworld. That moment passed, and Ukraine shows that as well.
Right.
And I hope they don't start with China
Right.
because yeah, but it looks like you know. Well, I mean, it looks like Iran's going to be the next big show. The Warhawks are going to get their wish. So,
Probably because on that subject, both parties agree in the US, it seems.
yep. The Christian Zionism is quite alive and well,
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately.
So how
So
long have you been back in Russia, man?
I've been here for since 2010. When did you move?
My first visit here was 2012 as a tourist, and my wife was not even my girlfriend yet. My wife, who is my wife now, was not even my girlfriend at the time. We officially moved 8 days before the special military operation.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
so we're exactly.
You go,
Um, you
what
know,
the hell did I just
I
do?
know, man. But it was because of that experience, that crazy timing, that I have the channel and that I'm, you know, doing well telling the world in English Russia is a normal place with my show. Because if we hadn't moved at that time, we wouldn't have moved. I just would have been like, oh, never mind. Let's just wait and let's see how things go.
Yeah.
But we were already committed. And then so I spent about 6 months feeling kind of ill. Did I make mistakes? Should I have not brought my kids here? But I kept seeing how everything was functioning well, how everything was like normal, despite the fact that there is technically a war front. Um, And I realized, no, I made the right decision. I'm in the right place. This is the right place to be. And then I realized, well, the West considers me behind enemy lines. I worked in Hollywood. I could make videos and people would watch them.
Hmm.
And so, after fretting about it for a couple months, I started the channel, and it, took off for me. It's been great. Now I get a chance to, be somebody and hopefully make a change in the world. Whereas I thought I was going to move here and just kind of semi-retire early.
So let me ask you this right off the bat. How did your relatives react after SMO started? And the State
Practically
Department was
everyone
screaming,
that
"Everyone
knows
leave,
me in the
everyone leave."
US.
Yeah. I mean, were your relatives going nuts?
Yeah, practically everyone that knows me in the US was like, "Oh my gosh." Yeah, they're like, "You got to come home. What are you doing?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not leaving." So, oh, it says the internet connection is unstable, and there's a
Yeah,
delay from you.
it's my high-speed internet.
Okay, now we're back to normal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, the embassy was saying leave, the sanctions started. It was crazy.
Joe Gonzalez, the Moscow photographer.
Eddie Gonzalez.
I'm sorry, Joe
Yes,
Gonzalez, Eddie Gonzalez.
yes.
I'm horrible with yeah, I'm horrible with names. Eddie Gonzalez. I was talking with
Yeah,
him.
he and I have done several shows together.
Yeah, I was talking with him about that. He said, yeah, all his relatives were screaming, "Oh my God, they're rounding up Americans. They're gonna shoot everybody." Like what?
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. It's just so not true. I mean, if you're a Western, you haven't been to Russia, you've got to come see what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
It's yeah.
So you worked in Hollywood. Before I go down that rabbit hole, y- I have seen more than a few reports how the news media and Hollywood too, when they show Russia in films, they use a gray filter to make that
Mhm.
oppressive mood feeling about anything they having to
Mhm.
deal with Russia.
Mhm.
True?
I didn't see that, but I've heard that story too, and it makes sense. And I know that they did that for a film where it was taking place in America and Mexico, for instance, and they intentionally grade all the Mexico stuff to make Mexico look a little bit more depressing. So yeah, they'll absolutely do that,
I've seen a video of
for
a
sure.
Chinese guy who said he's watching news on China and they have this reddish, polluted sky. And he walks out, puts his camera up, it's a blue sky. It's like, what the hell, man? Live from Beijing, it's a blue sky. It's not polluted. I can see the sun.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Hollywood's a powerful machine. They definitely
Absolutely.
influence the world in a big way. But I think just like America has lost its power or is losing it, and they just don't know it yet, Hollywood has absolutely lost the plot. They're declining big time
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah. What did you do in Hollywood?
So I only did it for about 6 years, so I didn't stick with it long enough to grow. I mean, you start out as an assistant director.
Hmm.
So that just
Oh.
means you're like a nobody on the set, helping do whatever needs to be done when they're filming. And then you start to become an assistant director. So you're closer to the director, working
Hmm.
with him. I did that. I worked a little bit of freelance for Warner Brothers and Disney. And you see, you see pretty much everybody when you're living in Hollywood, and you start to forget which celebrities you've seen and you haven't seen. So it was an exciting time. But what happened to me was I became a serious Christian and got baptized, and then I had my first child, and so my heart was divided. So my heart was not all in on Hollywood anymore, and I saw
Hmm.
Hollywood as the modern way to become king of the world. It was no longer, being part of a royal family or even being president anymore. Hollywood seemed to be the
Oh
way to
yeah,
go.
yeah. It is.
And but once I became a Christian, I realized, that's not what I wanted anymore. My goal was now to be whatever God wanted me to be. And so that's why I got out of the business. And I moved back to small town Florida, and I opened up a childcare. And I did that for almost 20 years
Wow.
and was just trying to be a Christian and an excellent father. And and make some money. And so, all my kids had aged out of the program. My Russian wife was missing home. And so we just decided to take a turn living in Russia. Little did we know that all this would happen. And,
You
we're,
took a
for all
big
intents and
turn.
purposes, we're here forever. Yeah, exactly.
The
Exactly.
The Mayflower is burning in the port and it's going down in the bay.
For for sure, because with my show, I wouldn't feel comfortable going back to the U.S. right now
Oh
because
yeah,
I'm putting
yeah.
a message that DC doesn't like.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so, I mean, statistically, I'd probably be okay, but there's no reason to risk them deciding to grab me and arrest me on some trumped up charge. And I mean, I've still got two youngish kids I want to raise, and Russia's a
Right.
big place. There's a lot I can see here.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree absolutely with you. So let me ask you this, because I understand Hollywood is corrupt. It's
mhm.
a decadent enough place, but is it really as bad and as dirty and as just satanic shithole? I don't know how else to put it, as a lot of people are saying it really is, or is it just
um,
again yellow journalism going overboard?
That's a good question. I mean, they will still have the American smile and be polite on the street.
Hmm.
But when you start to go deeper with like job interviews and photo shoots, and you start to see how creepy it's becoming, and you can see the path. If you keep going down this path, next thing you know, you're going to be at one of Diddy's white parties, let's say. Something
Yeah.
really, really, really sick. And it is kind of, after you're there a while, you start to get the sick feeling, like, especially if you become like a serious religious person, you start to realize, what is this all built on? This is just kind of gross, man. Just lots of exploitation of people. So.
Mm. Children.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see it, but it makes sense that that would happen,
Mm.
and I would certainly see like people that had just became legal, dressed very inappropriately at parties and events, so.
Yeah. For those who don't know, U.S. has what almost 500,000 missing children nationwide, and that statistic stays pretty much so steadfast. So yeah,
Awful.
it is. You got to wonder where did they just? I mean, 500,000 children missing, and that's not a number one issue for the FBI.
Yeah, I mean, and it's every once in a while, there's a news story, right, where people were found that they were kept for a few years in like someone's homemade dungeon, and you just got to imagine what awful things might be happening in the world,
Yeah.
that we don't know about. It's very, very sad.
On the one hand, you really don't want to know about it, but on the other hand, you really have to know about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's that
I agree.
if you ever want to change anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Russia has missing children too, but we've got what, about half the population in the U.S. and I think Russia has about 30 or 40,000 missing, which is way too many to begin with. But it's
Hmm.
1/10 of what the U.S. has.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Russia still has problems because people will criticize me sometimes that Russia's got problems too, or that Russia's worse, or that America's more religious. I mean, my point is I think you can see Russia heading in the right direction right now. And you can see the US heading in the West, heading in the other direction right now. Maybe more people go to church right now in the US. I think still statistically they do. But again, it's going in the wrong direction, and Russia's going in the correct direction. And you can see it on the street culturally. Things are about traditional family values here, um, at least in Moscow and everywhere I've traveled for the show. And in the U.S., you're not really free anymore. You live in
Well,
fear if you're a conservative person. You better keep your mouth shut, and go along with the woke line.
come on. Catholics, conservative Catholics are listed as a domestic terrorist threat.
Yeah, it's ridiculous,
Uh,
ridiculous.
and Orthodox, well, we're just some kind of form of Catholics anyways. We're even worse. We're more conservative. So we've got to be, a terrorist organization in the U.S., at least to the Washington elites.
Exactly,
Never
exactly.
mind those guys crossing the border. Those are just perfectly good people. But you damn Catholics over there, Orthodox. Yeah, we got our eye on you. We'll continue getting your kids and chopping their nads off and making them
Oh gosh,
one
it's
million and
awful,
50,000 other
awful.
genders.
It's like a frog in boiling water. I mean, if you stop and look at where the U.S. is right now, and what's happening to children, who are confused medically, it's so bad,
Oh,
so
it is.
terrible, you
It's
know.
huge money. There's huge money in this. Never mind government control over these people. I mean, there's gigantic money in the drugs and the operations and everything else.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, if you didn't know this world and you were flying in from another planet, like you're, I don't know, a Superman family or something, where would you choose to live? If you were trying to raise kids. I mean,
yeah,
seriously, it's crazy.
it is. It's absolutely insane. And the telling statistic before this craze started, I think there were like 3 or 4 gender reassignment clinics in the U.S. as a whole. Right. Now, most have dealt with hermaphrodites, which are pretty damn rare. It's like 1 in a million
Mhm.
mutation, or with
Mhm.
people that were born with damaged organs. Very few actual sex changes. And now
Mhm.
it's well over 200.
Awful, awful.
Yeah. It, when I moved the family, I mean, I saw where all this LGBT was heading. And I didn't want my family, I didn't want my kids in it. But tell you the truth, in my darkest scariest nightmare fantasies, I couldn't have predicted where it's gone now. They'd be chopping
Mm.
kids up and feeding them with uh, puberty blockers and all this other insanity. No. Even
Right,
stone drunk, I couldn't have come up with that kind of psychopathic idiocy. But and then here we go. We're living in it.
right,
Well,
right, right,
we're not living in it. They're living in it.
right. Well, that's great. You got to come here with your whole family, and
Yeah.
you're like an ex-military guy, and you have your show, and you live and work here in Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. So been doing it for a while. Well, I came over with a job. I did do that. I did come over as an expat. Came over as an expat, but we were immigrating all the time. I just didn't tell my company that I was actually immigrating. Thanks, I'm not coming back. Did I forgot to mention that? Oi, sorry, man. Yeah.
Wow,
So, but yeah.
interesting.
So, have any of your relatives come over?
No, I mean, my oldest came first to go to university because it was cheaper and he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. So I've got 5 kids in total. So he was here for a few years before we came, and then we
Oh,
came.
okay.
And so we were all living here. He actually just flew back yesterday to Vegas to spend a few months with his mom because he's undecided on whether or not he should live in Russia or America. But for a while now, he's been teaching Russians English,
Hmm.
and he never lived in America as an adult, so he has this curiosity to go and see it and see what it looks like. But our other 4 kids live with us in this big flat,
Hmm.
and they're often on my show because I have to take care of them. They're with me anyway. So my show is usually on the go, and it's whatever I'm doing, and I find interesting topics, to show the West how the same Russia is, and
Hmm.
and what about Russia is better in many ways.
Yep.
So yeah, so I'm very fortunate to get to live in this normal place and have my whole family here with me. It's I'm so thankful to God. You know.
Same here. Same. Uh, our time is almost up. I got the free version of Zoom because they don't take my Russian credit card. Their loss. So, thank you everyone for joining. Joe, if he's not against it, I will have him back, maybe next week,
Sure,
uh,
man.
if you want to join. So,
Yeah,
we'll continue the conversation. There's a lot to talk about. So,
yeah, of course, of course.
give it
We're
to
both amazing, interesting guys.